When Diana's mother, Olga Vladimirovna, called to say she'd been hospitalized with suspected appendicitis, Diana didn't hesitate. She dropped everything, took leave from work, and traveled to her mother's city. Thankfully, the diagnosis turned out to be a false alarm, and her mother was discharged shortly after. Diana, relieved but exhausted, returned home 3 days earlier than planned. She was looking forward to the quiet comfort of her apartment and the prospect of reuniting with her husband, Valerie, who was away on a work trip and scheduled to return soon. But as she approached her apartment door, the faint thud of loud music spilled into the hallway. Puzzled, Diana paused, her hand resting on the doorknob. Valerie wasn't home, he'd been away since Monday. And while he did occasionally host small gatherings with friends, it was always with her knowledge and in her presence. Unlocking the door, Diana was immediately taken aback. The entryway was littered with shoes, piles of them. It looked as though a circus caravan had decided to set up camp in her apartment. Her heart sank further as she walked into the living room. The scene before her was a nightmare. Guests crowded every inch of space, many already visibly drunk. Some didn't even bother removing their shoes, trampling mud and debris across the carpet. Plates and glasses were scattered across the room, and a red wine stain marred the beige sofa she and Valerie had recently purchased. In the middle of it all stood her mother-in-law, Elena Sergeyevna. Dressed in an attention-grabbing leopard print dress, she was clearly the center of the chaos. It didn't take long for Elena to notice Diana's arrival. Her eyes widened, and her face turned a deep shade of red, not from embarrassment, but from indignation. "What are you doing here?" she barked, her voice cutting through the din. Diana blinked in disbelief, her shock rendering her temporarily speechless. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "In my own apartment?" Elena wasted no time pressing her advantage. "I didn't invite you to this party, so don't even think about ruining it," she snapped, her tone dripping with hostility. Diana finally found her voice. "Excuse me? This is my apartment. I don't need an invitation to step into my own home." Elena scoffed but seemed momentarily taken aback. Before long, however, she was back to shouting. "You're being disrespectful. This is my birthday, and I won't have you spoiling it." Diana's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the mess. "Respect? You're hosting a drunken party in my home without my permission. You've destroyed my things and let strangers trample through my space. And you want to talk about respect?" The room fell silent as the confrontation escalated. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter fading into awkward murmurs. But Elena wasn't one to back down. "If you don't like it, you can leave," she hissed. "You weren't even supposed to be here. Go back to your mother's, no one invited you to ruin my night." Her words, cruel and cutting, sent Diana over the edge. She took a step forward, her voice sharp and steady. "You've crossed the line, Elena. This isn't your house, and I won't stand for this kind of disrespect anymore." The argument spiraled from there, with Elena hurling insults and Diana refusing to back down. Just as the tension reached a boiling point, the door opened, and Valerie walked in. His face immediately registered the chaos, his furious wife on one side, his shouting mother on the other, and a room full of guests looking on like spectators at a play. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Valerie stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes darting between his enraged wife and his mother, who was practically shaking with indignation. The tension in the room was suffocating, and the disarray only added to his confusion. Diana wasted no time. "What's going on?" "I'll tell you what's going on," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Your mother decided to host her birthday party here, in our apartment, without so much as asking me. Look at this mess. This is what I came home to." Elena Sergeyevna didn't miss a beat. "Oh, spare me the drama," she sneered. "It's my birthday. And you weren't even supposed to be here. What's the harm in a little celebration while you were gone?" Valerie pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly overwhelmed. "Mom, you should have asked Diana first. This is her home too. Elena's expression darkened. So now you're taking her side? After everything I've done for you? You let her control you like this, and now you're going to lecture me? Diana's frustration boiled over. Control him? Are you serious? All I've ever asked for is a little respect, and this is how you repay me? Hosting a party without permission and trashing our home? Elena wasn't backing down. Don't act so high and mighty. I raised Valerie, and I'll tell you something, you'll never come between me and my son. Valerie raised his hands, trying to calm both women. Enough. Both of you, he shouted. This is getting us nowhere. But neither Diana nor Elena was willing to let the other have the last word. Elena crossed her arms, glaring at her son. She's the one causing problems here, not me. If she can't handle sharing her precious apartment for one night, maybe she's the one who should leave. Diana's jaw tightened. Leave? You think I should leave my own home? You have some nerve, Elena. She turned to Valerie, her voice cold. You need to make a decision, Valerie. Are you going to stand up for me, or are you going to keep letting her treat me like this? Valerie looked trapped, his eyes darting between his mother and his wife. I don't want to choose between you two. Can't we just calm down and talk this through? Diana shook her head, her voice unwavering. No, Valerie. This has gone too far. Your mother has been disrespecting me from day one, and you've let it slide every time. If you can't set boundaries with her, then maybe you should go stay with her. Elena's lips curled into a smug smile. Hear that, Valerie? She's trying to drive a wedge between us. Typical. Diana turned to her mother-in-law, her tone icy. The only person driving a wedge here is you, Elena. You've been pushing your way into our lives and treating me like an outsider since the moment we got married. Valerie looked ready to burst from the pressure, but he knew he had to act. This isn't the time for this, he said, his voice strained. Mom, the party is over. Everyone needs to leave. Elena's face reddened in anger. What? You're siding with her? After all I've done for you? You're going to throw me out of your home? No, Valerie said firmly. But you're going to clean up this mess and show Diana some respect. This is her home too, and what you've done here is unacceptable. For a moment, there was silence, the tension crackling like static electricity. Elena glared at her son, clearly shocked that he was standing up to her. Fine, she said through gritted teeth, grabbing a glass of champagne and downing it in one gulp. But don't expect me to forget this. Diana let out a shaky breath, feeling both vindicated and emotionally drained. The guests, sensing the tension wasn't going to ease anytime soon, began gathering their things and quietly slipping out the door. As the apartment finally emptied, Valerie turned to Diana, his shoulders slumping in exhaustion. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never should have let this happen. Diana crossed her arms, still bristling. You shouldn't have. And you shouldn't have let her walk all over me for as long as she has. This needs to stop, Valerie. Once and for all. The aftermath of the party lingered like a bad smell. The apartment was in disarray, the tension between Diana and Valerie was palpable, and Elena's parting words hung in the air. Valerie spent the rest of the night cleaning up while Diana retreated to the bedroom, too angry and exhausted to engage further. The next morning, the apartment was silent. Diana sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, her eyes fixed on the clock, as Valerie emerged from the bedroom. His face was lined with guilt, and he hesitated before joining her. Good morning, he said cautiously, sitting down across from her. Is it? Diana replied, her tone sharp but quiet. Valerie sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know last night was a disaster. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let my mom host the party here without your permission. Diana set her coffee cup down and looked him straight in the eye. This isn't just about last night, Valerie. It's about everything. Your mother has been treating me like an intruder in my own life since the day we got married, and you've let it happen. Do you have any idea how that feels? I know she's difficult, Valerie admitted, his voice low. But she's my mom. She means well, even if she doesn't always show it the right way. Diana shook her head, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Meaning well doesn't excuse the way she treats me. She doesn't respect me, Valerie. She doesn't respect our marriage, and every time you let her get away with it, you're showing her that it's okay to keep pushing boundaries. Valerie leaned back in his chair, guilt and defensiveness warring on his face. What do you want me to do, Diana? She's my mother. I can't just cut her out of my life. No one's asking you to cut her out, Diana said, her voice softening slightly. But you need to set boundaries. You need to make it clear to her that our marriage comes first. That I come first. Valerie sighed deeply, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You're right, he said finally. I've been avoiding this for too long. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I didn't realize how much it was hurting you. Diana nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's not just about me, Valerie. It's about us. If we don't deal with this now, it's going to tear us apart. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. I'll talk to her, he promised. I'll make it clear that things need to change. But I need you to know that I love you, Diana. I don't want to lose you over this. Diana squeezed his hand, her expression softening. I don't want to lose you either. But this is the last time, Valerie. If she disrespects me like that again, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Valerie nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I understand. I'll fix this. Later that day, Valerie called his mother. He kept his voice calm but firm as he explained that what had happened the night before was unacceptable. Elena Sergeyevna, we need to talk about boundaries, he began. His mother's voice was sharp on the other end of the line. Boundaries? Don't start with me, Valerie. That girl is turning you against your own family. She's my wife, Valerie said, his tone unwavering. And this is her home as much as it is mine. What you did, hosting that party without asking her permission, was wrong. You owe her an apology. An apology? Elena practically screeched. For what? For celebrating my birthday? You're out of your mind, Valerie. I'm serious, Mom, he continued. This can't happen again. Diana deserves respect, and so does our marriage. If you can't accept that, then we're going to have a real problem. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Elena finally muttered, Fine. I'll apologize. But don't expect me to change who I am just because she's overly sensitive. Valerie didn't argue further, but he knew this wasn't the end of the battle. For the first time, though, he felt like he was finally taking a stand. The next day, Elena Sergeyevna showed up at the apartment unannounced, her expression a mix of forced contrition and simmering resentment. Diana wasn't thrilled to see her but decided to remain calm, determined to see how this so-called apology would unfold. Elena entered with a flourish, carrying a box of pastries as if it were some peace offering. I brought these, she announced, setting them on the counter. I thought it would be nice to have something sweet while we talk. Diana raised an eyebrow but said nothing, motioning for Elena to sit. Valerie joined them, his posture tense as he sat at the head of the table, clearly bracing for impact. So, Elena began, folding her hands in front of her. About the other night. I suppose things may have gotten a little out of hand. Diana leaned forward, keeping her tone neutral. A little out of hand? Your guests trashed our home, Elena. That's not just a little. Elena's eyes narrowed, but she quickly replaced her scowl with a tight-lipped smile. Fine. Perhaps I should have asked before hosting the party here. I didn't realize you'd be so particular about it. Particular? Diana repeated, her voice sharp. Elena, this is our home. It's not about being particular, it's about respect. And you've been crossing boundaries like this since the day we got married. Elena let out a theatrical sigh, leaning back in her chair. You young people and your obsession with boundaries. Back in my day, family didn't need to ask permission to celebrate together. Back in your day, maybe, Diana shot back. But this isn't your day, and it's not your home. You don't get to make decisions for us, especially not behind my back. Valerie stepped in, his tone firm. Mom, this is exactly what we talked about. You need to respect Diana and me as a couple. We're building a life together, and that means we make decisions together. If you can't accept that. Fine. Elena interrupted, throwing up her hands. I'm sorry, all right? I should have asked before hosting the party. There, are you happy now? Diana crossed her arms, unimpressed. An apology isn't about making someone happy, Elena. It's about acknowledging what you did wrong and meaning it. And frankly, it doesn't feel like you mean it. Elena's face flushed with anger, but she held her tongue. She glanced at Valerie, clearly hoping for backup, but he didn't come to her defense. I'll do better next time, Elena said stiffly, her voice dripping with insincerity. Are we done here? Diana sighed, deciding to let it go for now. We're done, for now. But if there's a next time, Elena, I won't be so patient. Elena stood abruptly, grabbing her bag and marching to the door. Well, I've said my piece. Don't expect me to grovel every time you're upset about something. As the door slammed behind her, Valerie let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. That went about as well as I expected, he muttered. Diana turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. This is on you too, Valerie. I need you to be consistent. If you backtrack or let her off the hook, this cycle is never going to end. He nodded solemnly. I know. And I won't. I promise. But deep down, Diana wasn't convinced. She had heard similar promises before, and until she saw real change, her trust in Valerie's ability to stand up to his mother would remain fragile. In the weeks following Elena's forced apology, tensions in the household remained high. While the apartment was back in order and life seemed to return to normal, the emotional fallout lingered. Valerie did his best to stay neutral, but his efforts only deepened Diana's frustration. She saw it as a lack of decisiveness, a refusal to truly take a stand. Meanwhile, Elena continued to push boundaries in subtle ways, calling Valerie late at night, dropping hints about favors she needed, and complaining about how difficult Diana was to her friends and family. One evening, as Diana and Valerie sat down for dinner, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, hesitating before answering. Hi, Mom, he said, his tone guarded. Diana's eyes narrowed as she quietly resumed eating, pretending not to listen. Valerie, I need you to stop by tomorrow, Elena said, her voice tinged with urgency. I've been having trouble with the faucet in the kitchen, and I don't want to wait for a plumber. Mom, can't it wait? I've got a lot on my plate at work, and I was hoping to spend some time with Diana this weekend. Elena scoffed loudly enough for Diana to hear. Oh, please. I raised you better than this. You can't spare an hour to help your own mother? Valerie glanced nervously at Diana, who was now glaring at him. I'll see if I can find some time, Mom, he said quickly, ending the call before she could argue further. As he put the phone down, Diana folded her arms. Really, Valerie? You can't even tell her no when it's about a faucet? How much longer are you going to let her manipulate you? Valerie sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's not manipulation, Diana. She's my mom. She needs help. She doesn't need help, Valerie. She needs control. Every little thing she asks for is her way of keeping you under her thumb, and you're letting her get away with it. I'm trying to keep the peace, he argued, his voice rising slightly. You know how she is, if I push back too hard, it'll just make things worse. Diana shook her head, her frustration mounting. Keeping the peace isn't working, Valerie. You're bending over backward for her while our marriage takes the hit. Is that what you want? No, he said quickly, running a hand through his hair. Of course not. I just don't know how to handle this without causing a bigger rift. Diana softened slightly, though her resolve remained firm. Then figure it out, Valerie. Because I can't keep living like this. You need to decide where your priorities lie, before it's too late. That night, as Diana lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of being second place in her own marriage. She loved Valerie, but the constant tug-of-war with his mother was wearing her down. For his part, Valerie stayed up late, pacing the living room and replaying their conversation in his head. He hated the position he was in, torn between the two most important women in his life, each demanding loyalty in their own way. He knew Diana was right. Something had to change. But the thought of confronting his mother in a meaningful way filled him with dread. The next morning, Valerie made a decision. He called his mother before heading to work, his voice steady but firm. Mom, about the faucet. I'll help you find a plumber, but I can't come over this weekend. Diana and I need time together, and I need to focus on my marriage. Elena's voice turned icy. So that's it? Your wife snaps her fingers, and you forget about your own mother? How disappointing, Valerie. This isn't about choosing sides, he said calmly, though his hands were shaking. It's about balance. I love you, Mom, but I can't keep letting this come between Diana and me. Please try to understand. Elena didn't respond right away, but the silence on the line spoke volumes. Fine, she said eventually, her voice clipped. Do what you want. But don't expect me to just sit back and be ignored. As Valerie hung up, he felt a mix of relief and unease. It was a small step, but it was the first time he had drawn a boundary with his mother. Now he just had to hope it would be enough. For a few weeks, it seemed as though Valerie's conversation with Elena had made an impact. She kept her distance, refraining from unannounced visits and limiting her calls to polite check-ins. Diana noticed the change and cautiously allowed herself to feel optimistic. But Elena Sergeyevna wasn't one to let things go so easily. Her silence wasn't acceptance, it was strategy. She was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to reassert herself. That moment came on a Sunday afternoon. Diana and Valerie were enjoying a rare, peaceful day together. The apartment was filled with the aroma of homemade lasagna, and they had just sat down to eat when the doorbell rang. Valerie exchanged a nervous glance with Diana before opening the door. There stood Elena, holding a stack of documents and wearing an expression of practiced innocence. Hi, sweetheart, she said brightly, stepping inside before Valerie could respond. I need your help with some paperwork. It's urgent. Diana's expression hardened as she set down her fork. Elena, we're in the middle of lunch. Couldn't this have waited? Elena waved her off, already making her way to the living room. Oh, it won't take long. Besides, Valerie is always happy to help his mother, aren't you, dear? Valerie froze, torn between the need to enforce his boundaries and the instinct to appease his mother. Diana's voice cut through his hesitation. Valerie, we talked about this. Remember? Elena's eyes narrowed. Talked about what? Setting rules for your own mother like I'm some stranger? Valerie took a deep breath, stepping forward. Mom, we're having lunch. If you need help, I can come by tomorrow, but today is our time. Please respect that. Elena's face flushed with anger. Respect? Is this the respect I get after raising you? After everything I've done for you? She turned to Diana, her voice sharp. This is your doing, isn't it? You're driving a wedge between us. Diana didn't flinch. I'm asking for what any wife would want, Elena, a husband who prioritizes his marriage. You're his mother, not his keeper. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Valerie stood his ground. Mom, enough. I'm not choosing between you and Diana, but I am asking you to give us space. If you can't respect that, we're we're going to have a serious problem." Elena stared at him, stunned. For the first time, her son was speaking to her not as her little boy, but as a grown man asserting his independence. She pursed her lips, snatched the documents from the table, and stormed toward the door. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "But don't come crying to me when this marriage falls apart." The door slammed behind her, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Valerie turned back to Diana, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Diana reached for his hand, her expression softening. "You did the right thing, Valerie. I know it wasn't easy, but it's what we need to move forward." He nodded, though the ache of disappointing his mother lingered. "I just hope she'll understand someday." That night, as Diana and Valerie lay in bed, she felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. For the first time in their marriage, Valerie was truly standing up for their relationship, and for her. The weeks following Elena's dramatic exit were quieter than Diana and Valerie had expected. Elena refrained from showing up unannounced, and her calls became less frequent. At first, Diana thought it might be another one of Elena's strategies, but as time passed, it seemed that Valerie's words had finally struck a chord. One evening, while Valerie was at work, Diana received a call from Elena. She hesitated before answering, bracing herself for another confrontation. "Hello, Diana," Elena began, her tone uncharacteristically subdued. I wanted to say something." Diana stayed silent, waiting. "I may have overstepped," Elena admitted, her voice halting. "I'm used to things being a certain way, and it's been hard for me to accept that Valerie is building a life with you, a life that doesn't revolve around me anymore." Diana blinked in surprise. Of all the things she had expected, an admission like this wasn't one of them. "I know I've been difficult," Elena continued. "And I know I haven't made things easy for you. But I don't want to lose my son, or have him resent me. So I'm going to try to give you two the space you deserve." For a moment, Diana didn't know what to say. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured but sincere. "Thank you, Elena. That means more to me than you know. All I've ever wanted is for us to respect each other, for Valerie's sake, and for ours." There was a pause on the line before Elena replied, "Well, we'll see how it goes. But I'll try. That's all I can promise for now." When Valerie returned home that evening, Diana shared the conversation with him. Relief flooded his face, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself a hopeful smile. "Maybe this is the start of something better," he said, pulling Diana into a hug. Over the next few months, the balance in their lives began to shift. Elena made a genuine effort to respect the boundaries Valerie and Diana had set, and while her strong personality didn't change overnight, the tension between them eased. Diana and Valerie grew closer, their communication improving as they navigated the challenges together. Valerie learned to assert himself without guilt, and Diana found herself letting go of some of the resentment she had been holding on to. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for both of them, that was enough. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Diana rested her head on Valerie's shoulder and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said. He nodded, kissing her forehead. "Yeah. And we'll keep figuring it out. Together." In the background, her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "I'm trying out that lasagna recipe you mentioned. Think you and Valerie could come by for dinner next week?" Diana chuckled softly, showing Valerie the message. "She's really trying, isn't she?" "She is," he agreed. "And so are we." And for the first time, Diana felt like they were all moving in the same direction, toward a future built on understanding, compromise, and, most importantly, love.